The first light of morning washed over JFK Airport like a slow-moving tide, bathing the tarmac in hues of apricot and pale gold. Captain Elise Morin stood at the base of the jet bridge rail, breathing in the chilled air that still carried a hint of winter. She always arrived early, earlier than anyone expected, because the cockpit felt like home, and homes deserved a moment of stillness before the chaos of the day began. Today, though, something hovered in the air. Not dread, not fear, something harder to name, a stillness, a heaviness, almost like the sky itself was holding its breath. She adjusted the cuffs of her uniform jacket as she stepped into the aircraft. "Morning, Captain," the flight attendants chorused, their energy polite, practiced, familiar. "Morning," she responded with that warm, steady voice that even crying Bobbies seemed to settle at. She always sounded calm, always in control, even when she was. The cockpit door swung open with a familiar metallic thud, and there it was, her sanctuary. Screens dark, switches at rest, yokes untouched. For most people, it looked like a forest of buttons and glass. To Elise, it was a language, one she spoke better than any other. Her co-pilot, First Officer Jeremy Klein, was already inside, flipping through checklists. 29, bright, eager, good under pressure, though he didn't yet know how to trust his instincts. "Good morning, Captain," he said with a hopeful grin that didn't quite match the deep circles under his eyes. "Tired?" she asked as she set her bag behind her seat. "Fiancé's planning the wedding. I don't think she slept, which means I didn't either." Elise chuckled softly. "Well, today will give you a smooth ride so you can recover." Jeremy nodded, rubbing his eyes. "Smooth ride sounds perfect." Smooth, Elise almost smiled at the word. Aviation was never truly smooth. It kept secrets. It hid surprises. And she knew that better than most. She strapped in, hands brushing gently across the throttles, the autopilot panel, the flight controls, as if greeting old friends. Across the intercom, the crew made their rounds. "Good morning, folks. Welcome aboard Flight 287, non-stop service to Denver." Elise and Jeremy moved together through checklists, their voices rhythmically alternating in steady, trained cadence. Flight controls checked. Fuel quantity confirmed. Hydraulics normal. Takeoff configuration set. By the time passengers began boarding, she was already in that razor-sharp mental zone pilots slipped into, alert but calm, focused yet relaxed. Outside the cockpit door, humanity streamed in, a collage of stories she'd never know but always felt responsible for. A businessman whose tailored suit couldn't hide his exhaustion. A mother soothing a baby with soft hums. A teenage boy gripping a backpack like a life vest. An elderly couple holding hands, whispering jokes only they understood. Every face mattered, every life mattered. When the last passenger crossed the threshold, Elise signaled the cabin crew, ready for pushback. The tug latched onto the aircraft with a metallic clunk. "Clear to start engines," came the ground crew's voice. Elise felt her heartbeat align with the rising whir of the left engine, then the right. The plane came alive under her hands, shuddering with controlled power as it taxied across the vast, shimmering labyrinth of taxiways. The sky grew brighter, streaks of sunlight catching the aircraft windows like scattered diamonds. Runway 4L cleared for takeoff. Flight 287, Air Traffic Control announced. "Cleared for takeoff," Elise repeated, her voice carrying that unmistakable pilot confidence passengers trusted without ever seeing the face behind it. They accelerated. Engines roared. The aircraft surged forward, pressing every passenger into their seats. At rotation speed, Elise gently eased the yoke back, coaxing the jet into the air. The ground fell away. New York shrank beneath them, becoming a patchwork of glittering rivers, narrow streets, and tiny moving specks that were cars. "Climb level cruise." Elise exhaled, a slow, deep breath she hadn't realized she was holding. 30 minutes later, they were settled at 30,000 feet, slicing cleanly through ribbons of thin cloud. The sky stretched endlessly, a serene ocean of pale blue above and cotton shadows below. Sunlight reflected off the wings with a brilliance that always made Elise pause, not for long, just long enough to remember how lucky she was to be one of the few people in the world entrusted to command this height, this view, this responsibility. "Looks like we're in for an easy one," Jeremy said, sipping from a paper cup of scalding black coffee. "Don't jinx it," Elise teased. He laughed, shaking his head. "You and your superstitions." "I prefer the term experience," she replied, though part of her wasn't joking. The crew buzzed softly in the background, attending to passengers. The smell of brewed coffee drifted faintly from the galley. A soft chime sounded as someone pressed a call button. A baby cried somewhere around row 21 but quickly settled. Everything felt routine. Elise reached for her coffee cup, glancing briefly through the windshield. And then, a sound like a thunderclap tore through the fuselage. The aircraft jerked hard to the left, nearly sideways. Alarms shrieked. Red lights flashed like bright, furious stars across the cockpit panel. The yoke shuddered violently. "What the?" Jeremy gasped. Another explosion boomed, even louder, deeper, this one from beneath the right engine. The aircraft lurched. A violent tremor shook the cabin. Oxygen masks dropped with a loud mechanical snap. A chorus of screams spilled from behind the cockpit door. Elise slammed both palms onto the controls, muscles tensing as the jet rolled beyond what was acceptable at cruise altitude. The nose dipped sharply. The sound of roaring wind swallowed everything. "Left engine's gone," Jeremy shouted above the chaos. Then, a moment of chilling, unnatural silence. The right engine, once thundering with power, suddenly wound down like a dying heartbeat. Silence. Total horrifying silence. Elise's stomach dropped, her breathing stilled. Both engines gone. The Boeing had become a massive, powerless glider. Alarms kept shrieking, but the world seemed to slow around her. She heard the wind. She heard the faint, rhythmic beep of altitude decreasing. She heard her own pulse pounding in her ears. Passengers wailed. Crew shouted instructions. The aircraft descended faster, faster than anything she had ever experienced in her entire career. Jeremy's voice cracked. "Captain, what do we do?" Elise didn't answer right away. Because in that terrifying moment, one realization hit her with brutal clarity. This was no simple failure. This was a catastrophe. And if she didn't act within seconds, 200 people behind her would never touch the ground alive. She tightened her grip on the yoke. Just as the radio crackled with a frantic, trembling voice that made her blood run cold. "Flight 287, do you copy? We're tracking your descent. And you're heading straight toward the Rockies." The cabin's atmosphere was calm, deceptively calm. Passengers chatted quietly, oblivious to the growing tension in the cockpit. Amelia Harris, the flight captain, scanned the instrument panel with a meticulous precision that came from years of flying under pressure. Her co-pilot, a young man named Kyle Reynolds, fidgeted nervously. He had trained for emergencies, of course, but nothing in simulation could fully prepare someone for this. Amelia's jaw tightened as she studied the fuel gauges. Something was off. The left engine had begun to fluctuate. "Amelia," Kyle's voice wavered, "the left engine's showing intermittent drops. Do you think it's a sensor glitch?" She shook her head, not taking her eyes off the panel. "No, that's real. Keep monitoring it, but get ready for contingency procedures." Her voice was calm, almost soothing, but inside, her mind raced. She had flown through turbulence, storms, and mechanical failures, but nothing had prepared her for the possibility of both engines failing simultaneously at 35,000 feet. The hum of the engines changed subtly, a low, unsettling note that made her stomach twist. Amelia had learned early in her career that pilots could afford fear. They could only act. She adjusted the autopilot, running through mental checklists at a speed Kyle could barely keep up with. The plane shuddered slightly, as if testing her resolve. "Passengers," she began over the intercom, her tone casual, "we're experiencing a minor technical issue. Nothing to worry about. Please remain seated with your seatbelts fastened." The words sounded practiced, but Amelia knew the truth. If one engine had already faltered, the other might not hold. She imagined the headlines: "Passenger jet crashes in the Rockies. Investigators scramble for answers." Not on her watch. Not today. Kyle's hand hovered over the controls, his knuckles white. Do you think we could?" Amelia cut him off gently. "Focus on procedure. We'll handle this together." She could feel his tension, his fear, and it made her pulse quicken, not with panic but with determination. This young co-pilot trusted her life, and the lives of 200 passengers, to her judgment. She couldn't let him or anyone else down. Suddenly, the left engine screamed a high-pitched warning and the plane shuddered violently. A jolt ran through the cabin. Passengers gasped. A toddler screamed. The sensation of a sudden drop in altitude hit Amelia's stomach like a punch. This was no longer a minor technical issue. "Engine 2 is showing fluctuations now," Kyle reported, his voice tight, almost breaking. It's not responding correctly." Amelia exhaled slowly. "All right, brace yourself, Kyle. We're going to run the dual-engine failure checklist. Step 1, maintain control. Step 2, stabilize altitude as much as possible. Step 3, identify nearest landing options." "Got it." "Yes," he managed, his hands trembling slightly as he adjusted the throttle. The reality of their situation was immense. A commercial jet losing both engines at cruising altitude rarely ended well. Amelia had studied past incidents, memorized procedures, and prepared herself mentally, but reading about it in a manual was nothing compared to experiencing it in real time, with hundreds of lives depending on her decisions. She called air traffic control. "Mayday, Mayday. This is Flight 417. We are experiencing dual-engine failure over the Rockies. Request immediate guidance for emergency landing." A crackling voice responded. "Flight 417, copy. Nearest airport, Denver International, 120 miles northeast. Altitude, how critical is your situation?" Amelia weighed her words carefully. "We're losing altitude. Request vectors immediately." The controller's voice was professional, but there was a subtle undertone of urgency. "Roger that. Turn 45, descend to 28,000 feet. Emergency crews on standby." Kyle swallowed audibly. 28,000, we're already losing altitude faster than that. We can't make it." Amelia's mind raced. She scanned the map, her eyes darting across mountain ranges, rivers, and valleys. There were no nearby airports within easy reach, but she remembered a river valley, wide and flat, that could serve as a last-resort landing strip. The thought was terrifying but clear. If they couldn't reach the airport, that valley might be their only chance. "Amelia," Kyle's voice cracked, "do you think we can land it there?" She turned to him, her eyes sharp. "We don't have a choice, but if we stay calm, follow the procedure, and trust the plane, we can." The cabin began to feel the effects of the engine failures. The air conditioning faltered, the hum of electrical systems became intermittent, and a low vibration ran through the fuselage. Passengers murmured nervously. Amelia knew she had to keep them calm, even as fear threatened to grip her own heart. "Ladies and gentlemen," she said over the intercom, her voice steady and commanding, "we are experiencing a technical issue. Please remain calm and seated with your seatbelts fastened. We will get through this safely." A collective sigh of relief, however fleeting, ran through the cabin. Amelia glanced at Kyle. She could see the worry etched into his face, but also the flicker of trust. He believed in her, and right now that belief mattered as much as any engine. She ran through emergency checklists almost instinctively, adjusting flaps, trimming the aircraft and monitoring the descent rate. The mountains loomed closer, their jagged peaks cutting across the horizon. Every second mattered. One wrong decision could turn this flight into a disaster. Suddenly, the plane lurched violently to the left. Amelia gripped the controls tightly. "We're experiencing asymmetric thrust. Counterbalance with rudder and ailerons. Maintain control." Kyle followed her instructions, hands moving precisely, but his fear was palpable. Amelia could feel the tension radiating through him, but she forced herself to stay focused, to stay calm, to stay alive. Below, the river valley appeared, narrow but open enough to attempt an emergency landing. Trees flanked both sides, and the water glistened ominously in the afternoon sun. It was the only option. Amelia calculated distances, angles, and descent speed in her mind. There was no margin for error. "Brace for potential impact," she whispered to Kyle. "We're going to try a river landing. Stay with me." Kyle nodded, swallowing hard. "I'm with you." The plane's nose dipped further, the dual-engine hum fading into an eerie silence, broken only by the wind rushing past. Amelia adjusted flaps and throttles manually, pushing the aircraft toward the river with a precision that made her own muscles ache from tension. Passengers looked out the windows, their faces pale, gripping armrests as the reality of the situation set in. Some prayed. Some sobbed. Amelia could hear the collective heartbeat of 200 people in the cabin, all of it resting on her hands. And then in the distance, the valley opened wider, a sliver of hope. But the river was not smooth. Rocks jutted out and trees lined the banks. One miscalculation could destroy the aircraft instantly. Amelia's jaw tightened. Focus. One maneuver at a time, one step at a time. As the plane descended, the shadow of the mountains grew longer. Wind buffeted the fuselage. Kyle whispered almost to himself, "We might just make it." Amelia didn't respond. There was no room for hope yet, only action, only precision, only survival. And in that moment, with the dual engines failing and the river valley rushing toward them, Amelia Harris became the calm eye in the storm, the only thing standing between 200 lives and certain disaster. But as the first treetops loomed dangerously close, a new problem emerged, threatening to undo everything. The plane shuddered violently as Amelia guided it lower over the river valley. Trees whipped past the windows, their branches scraping against the fuselage with sickening thuds. The roar of the wind drowned out everything else, passengers' screams, the creak of stressed metal, even Kyle's shaky breathing. Amelia's hands were white-knuckled on the yoke, her eyes locked on the narrow stretch of water ahead. Every second felt like an eternity. "Steady, steady," she muttered under her breath, forcing herself to focus. Her training kicked in like a second heartbeat. Years of simulator drills, turbulence flights, and emergency procedures condensed into this single, critical moment. She could feel the engine sputtering faintly behind her, gasping for air. The dual-engine failure wasn't just a technical emergency. It was a countdown clock, ticking louder with each passing second. Kyle glanced at the river, then back at Amelia. It's narrower than I thought. We've got maybe 50 meters between the banks." Amelia's jaw tightened. 50 meters. That was barely the wingspan of the plane itself. Miscalculate by even a degree and the fuselage would shear into the rocks lining the river. She swallowed the lump in her throat and adjusted the flaps. "We can do this. Focus on speed and descent. Keep the nose slightly up. Don't let us stall." The passengers gripped their armrests in unison, as if they could collectively anchor themselves through sheer will. A child cried behind Amelia, and she imagined the parents' silent panic, their trust in strangers holding firm only because she and Kyle held the controls. The weight of it pressed on her chest. 200 lives. Every choice she made now carried consequences unimaginable. Below, the river twisted sharply. A fallen tree stretched across the water like an obstacle in a video game, its jagged limbs threatening to rip through the fuselage. Amelia adjusted the angle, banking slightly, but the plane shuddered violently. The left wing dipped too low. Panic gnawed at the edges of her mind, but she shoved it aside. There was no room for fear. Only calculation, precision, and the faint, stubborn hope that survival was still possible. "Brace positions," she shouted into the intercom. "Everyone stay seated, arms across your chest." Passengers obeyed, their faces pale, knuckles white. Some whispered prayers. Others stared blankly at the approaching river, frozen in shock. Amelia didn't have time to comfort them. She had to steer. She had to survive. The plane grazed the treetops, snapping branches and shattering a small section of the left wingtip. The cabin jolted violently. Oxygen masks dropped from the ceiling as the emergency lights flickered. Amelia could hear the metallic groan of stressed metal. She swallowed hard, her hands moving with practiced precision, guiding the aircraft through the chaos. Kyle's voice trembled. "We're losing altitude faster than I can compensate. The right bank's coming up. Do we risk skimming it?" Amelia didn't hesitate. "We have to. Trust me, aim for the riverbed just past the bend. Throttle full idle, flaps down." The aircraft plummeted, water rushing toward them at a terrifying speed. Amelia felt the nose dip too low and instinctively pulled back, easing the plane into a glide. Trees scraped again, sparks flying from the wingtip. The river rushed beneath them like molten silver, foaming and unforgiving. She thought about the passengers, an elderly couple holding hands, a mother clutching her baby, a group of college students laughing just moments ago. She couldn't fail them. Every instinct, every ounce of skill, every split-second decision mattered. Below, the river twisted into a wider stretch. Amelia focused every fiber of her being on that small gap, imagining the plane sliding over the surface like a carefully balanced stone skipping across water. She adjusted the rudder, feathered the flaps, and held her breath. The first contact with the water was violent. The nose dipped into the current, skimming the surface. A spray of water shot up, misting the windshield. The fuselage groaned, the landing gear scraping along hidden rocks. Amelia fought the controls, countering each violent shift as the river's current threatened to drag the plane sideways. Passengers screamed, some praying, some sobbing, all of them gripping for dear life. Kyle fought beside her, keeping the plane aligned, his youthful fear tempered by the trust he placed in Amelia. "Keep her level," she shouted. "Don't let her roll." The plane bounced along the river's surface, each impact rattling through the cabin. Sparks flew where metal scraped against rock and water surged in, wetting the lower panels. Amelia's mind raced, calculating distance, speed, angle, and survival odds in milliseconds. Each second that passed was a victory. Each bump the plane absorbed was proof that her instincts and her training might just be enough. They cleared the worst of the obstacles, but another challenge loomed. A fallen power line hung low across the river, swaying perilously with the wind. Amelia's eyes locked on it. Too low and they'd be shredded. Too high and they'd lose control. She tilted the nose up slightly, banking to the left, and the plane scraped past with inches to spare. Sparks showered from the impact, and Amelia felt the pulse of adrenaline surge through her. The plane leveled out, floating like a wounded bird across the river. Water spray drenched the fuselage, but for the first time, Amelia allowed herself a brief glimmer of hope. They might survive this. They could survive this. But the river was far from forgiving. Rapids ahead churned violently, threatening to spin the aircraft sideways. Amelia adjusted the rudder, angling for a calmer section. Kyle's hands moved quickly, following her commands with precision. Sweat streaked his face. His eyes darted between instruments and the rushing water below. "We're going to make it, aren't we?" he asked, voice barely audible over the roar. Amelia didn't answer. She couldn't. She focused, heart pounding, eyes locked on the river ahead. Each second was a battle, each maneuver a choice between life and death. The plane struck the commerce section. The fuselage shuddered, water spraying into the cabin as passengers were thrown against their seatbelts. Amelia guided the plane slowly, deliberately, toward a wide, flat stretch of the riverbank. Rocks threatened the landing, but she adjusted, flaring the nose just in time. The landing gear hit, skidding across mud and gravel. The aircraft lurched, groaning, metal protesting with every movement. The passengers screamed, some in terror, others in relief, clutching each other as the plane ground to a halt. Amelia didn't move. She kept her hands steady on the controls, eyes scanning the riverbank for hazards. Kyle exhaled audibly beside her. We did it," he whispered. Amelia didn't respond. Survival wasn't about words. She had to get everyone out alive. Smoke began to curl from the right engine, damaged in the landing. She knew the plane could ignite at any moment. "Evacuate, everyone, follow instructions, calmly but quickly." The cabin erupted into chaos, but Amelia and Kyle moved with authority. Passengers followed their lead, sliding down emergency slides into the shallow riverbank. Some helped others, lifting the injured, supporting the elderly, consoling terrified children. Every second counted. Amelia's pulse thudded in her ears as she scanned the cabin, counting heads, ensuring no one was left behind. And then she saw him, a man pinned beneath a seat, groaning, unable to move. Without hesitation, Amelia waded through water, lifted the debris, and helped him to safety. Kyle covered her, guiding remaining passengers to the slides. Finally, with everyone out, Amelia climbed onto the riverbank, her uniform soaked, her face streaked with mud and sweat. She looked at the plane, twisted and battered, smoke curling into the sky, yet somehow intact. 200 lives had survived against impossible odds. For a brief moment, the adrenaline faded, replaced by a raw, hollow exhaustion. But then she noticed a glint in the distance, a sharp reflection catching her eye near the tree line. Her stomach sank. The plane wasn't fully stable. A secondary hazard loomed, threatening to turn this miraculous landing into disaster once more. Amelia tightened her jaw. She wasn't done yet, not by a long shot. Amelia's boots sank into the muddy riverbank as she scanned the horizon. The passengers huddled together, shivering and soaked, their eyes wide with disbelief. Relief had barely settled in when she noticed it, a faint, orange glow near the tree line, flickering unnaturally. Smoke from the plane's damaged engine curled toward the sky, but this glow was different. Something was moving closer, fast. "Everyone stay back," she shouted, adrenaline surging. Her voice carried over the river, sharp and commanding. Kyle positioned himself beside her, scanning the area with wide, fearful eyes. The glow intensified, revealing itself as a fire sparked by leaking fuel, now creeping toward the main fuselage. Passengers gasped, panic rising. "Is it going to explode?" a young woman screamed, clutching her child. Amelia didn't answer immediately. Her mind raced. The river had slowed their progress, absorbing much of the heat, but the fire creeping along the fuselage was fast. Too fast. One misstep could ignite the entire plane. "We need to move everyone farther up the bank now," she barked. Her calm, decisive tone helped steady the passengers, but fear was contagious. People stumbled over roots and mud, slipping in haste. Amelia helped guide the elderly couple, holding their hands as they climbed to a safer patch of ground. Kyle assisted a family of 4, supporting the mother as she carried her baby. The fire's roar grew, echoing off the valley walls. Amelia's heart pounded. 200 lives were now at the mercy of nature and damaged machinery. The river had saved them from an impossible crash, but it hadn't ended the threat. Amelia's training kicked in again. She scanned the plane and the surroundings. Trees offered some protection, but smoke made breathing difficult. She instructed passengers to cover their mouths and noses with jackets and scarves. Everyone obeyed, fear evident in their shaking hands and tear-streaked faces. "Keep moving," Amelia urged. "Follow us, keep together." Minutes passed like hours as they navigated uneven terrain. Mud clung to their boots, the river's edge slippery and treacherous. The fire behind them crackled, leaping higher with every gust of wind. Amelia glanced back, heart in her throat. Sparks danced on the fuselage. A low hiss indicated that fuel lines had ruptured. One wrong moment and the entire aircraft could erupt. Suddenly, a loud snap echoed through the trees. a large branch breaking under strain, falling perilously close to the group. Passengers screamed, scrambling in all directions. Amelia lunged forward, grabbing a child before he tumbled into the mud. Kyle pushed a man aside just in time, and the branch slammed into the ground with a deafening crack. "Everyone okay?" Amelia called, her voice strained but controlled. Shaken, the passengers nodded, but the tension was palpable. Eyes darted to the plane, then back at Amelia, waiting for guidance. She felt the weight of their trust pressing down on her shoulders. One wrong decision now could undo everything. "Water's shallow, but it's still wet," she said, pointing toward a small rise upstream. "We can climb there safely. Keep together one step at a time." As they moved, Amelia noticed something alarming. The riverbank on the opposite side was eroding from the force of the landing. Mud and debris were sliding into the water, threatening to destabilize the plane even further. If the bank gave way completely, the aircraft could tip, and any passengers still nearby, or rescue crews arriving too soon, could be trapped or worse. She adjusted her pace, leading the group carefully along the safest path. Kyle stayed beside her, helping the elderly and injured. Amelia's boots sank into the mud repeatedly, each step a reminder of how precarious their position was. A sudden scream tore through the air. Amelia whipped her head toward the source. A young man had slipped, twisting his ankle in the mud. He fell hard, the pain clear on his face. Amelia sprinted to him, crouching down beside his body. "I've got you," she said firmly, lifting him gently to his feet. Kyle helped support him. "Keep moving, we're almost there." The fire crackled behind them, closer now. The smell of burning fuel stung their eyes. Amelia's mind calculated every second. They had maybe 10 minutes before the situation escalated beyond control. From the tree line, a distant roar echoed. Amelia froze, listening. Was it thunder? Another engine part? No, it was a helicopter. Emergency services. Rescue crews. Relief surged, but it was mixed with anxiety. The helicopter would need space to land safely, and the riverbank was crowded with panicked passengers. They weren't safe yet. "Everyone listen," Amelia shouted. "Stay in place, keep low. The rescue helicopter is coming, do not run." Passengers froze, eyes wide, watching the approaching orange speck in the sky. The hum grew louder, and Amelia directed them to clear a small path on higher ground. She motioned for Kyle to help maintain order. Panic threatened to erupt again, but her authority kept the group grounded. The helicopter descended slowly, blades whipping mud and water into the air. Amelia's heart pounded. One misstep from the pilot, one misjudgment from her, and disaster could strike again. She counted heads repeatedly, ensuring everyone was accounted for. And then a shout from the riverbank froze her blood. One of the passengers, an elderly man, had veered too close to the burning fuselage, mesmerized by the flames. Amelia's instincts kicked in instantly. She ran, dodging mud and debris, grabbing his arm, pulling him to safety just as a small explosion rocked the aircraft behind them. The force knocked her off her feet, mud coating her uniform, but she scrambled to her knees. Kyle was already assisting others, moving them toward higher ground. The passengers huddled together, shaking, terrified but alive. Amelia looked at the burning plane, smoke and flames now rising sharply into the sky. It was a horrific sight, yet it was also proof. Proof that they had survived the impossible. Her heart still raced, every muscle trembling, but she refused to collapse. There was still work to do, getting everyone safely onto the helicopter. She motioned for the injured to go first. Rescue crew members were shouting instructions, but Amelia stayed at the forefront, guiding people up the slope, helping the weak and fearful. One by one, they were lifted to safety, the hum of the helicopter's blades drowning out the fire's roar. Then she noticed a young woman still on the riverbank, frozen in shock. Amelia waded through mud and shallow water, grabbed her, and pulled her toward safety. Another life accounted for. Finally, with all passengers on the safer ground and the helicopter hovering above, Amelia allowed herself a brief moment to breathe. Smoke and fire consumed the plane now, a stark reminder of how close they had come to disaster. Kyle approached, mud streaked on his face, eyes wide. "Amelia, we did it," he whispered. She shook her head, exhausted but resolute. "Not yet. Everyone still has to make it to the helicopter." As the last passengers climbed aboard, Amelia looked back at the plane, flames now roaring high into the sky. The river, which had saved them, now reflected the orange inferno like molten glass. She realized how thin the line had been between survival and catastrophe. And then a sudden, terrifying crack echoed across the valley. A massive section of the riverbank began to collapse, sending mud, rocks, and water cascading toward the plane. Amelia froze, heart in her throat. If the collapse reached the plane before the last rescue crew could secure it, there would be no second chance. Her eyes darted to the helicopter. Pilots hovered, waiting for clearance. Rescue workers shouted instructions over the roar. Amelia's voice rose above them all, strong and commanding. "Move now, everyone on board, go." And in that moment, as the riverbank threatened to swallow everything, Amelia knew that even after surviving dual-engine failure and a river landing, the danger wasn't over yet. The cinematic drama wasn't finished. Amelia's heart pounded like a drum as she scanned the collapsing riverbank. Mud and rocks tumbled into the water, sending ripples that threatened to destabilize the burning plane even further. The helicopter hovered, its blades churning the air into a chaotic whirlwind, as rescue workers scrambled to secure the remaining passengers. Every second felt stretched to infinity. One wrong move could cost lives. "Move faster," Amelia shouted, pushing through the thick mud, helping a mother lift her child into the helicopter harness. Her own uniform was soaked, streaked with grime and soot. Sweat ran down her face, mingling with mud, but she didn't slow. Every passenger's life rested on her decisions. Kyle followed close behind, supporting the elderly and those injured in the landing. His face was pale, lips quivering from exhaustion and adrenaline, but he never faltered. He trusted Amelia, and that trust gave him strength. Amelia glanced at him, nodding briefly. No words were needed. They were a team, fighting against nature, machinery, and sheer chance. The last group of passengers hesitated near the riverbank, terror frozen in their eyes as they stared at the flames consuming the plane. Amelia's voice rose, sharp and commanding. "You can make it. Follow me. Don't look back, trust me." A young man tripped in the mud, sprawling toward the burning fuselage. Amelia lunged forward, grabbing his arm, pulling him upright with all her strength. Sparks flew from the plane's wingtip as if mocking their effort. The riverbank shook with another minor collapse, sending a wave of water and debris toward them. Amelia didn't hesitate. She grabbed a nearby branch for balance, pulled the man along, and kept moving. The helicopter pilot signaled. It was now or never. Amelia helped the last passengers onto the harnesses. The cables creaked under the weight, groaning as if they too were aware of the stakes. Amelia's pulse raced. She scanned the area one final time, every passenger accounted for, every life balanced on a knife's edge. Then she noticed him, a small child, barely 3 years old, clutching a stuffed toy, frozen in terror. He had slipped behind a boulder out of reach of the rescue crew. Amelia's stomach dropped. Without thinking, she sprinted toward him, mud sucking at her boots, flames reflecting in her eyes. "Come on, buddy," she shouted, her voice steady despite the chaos. The child's eyes widened, and he took a trembling step toward her. Amelia reached him just as another wave of mud and debris surged from the collapsing bank. She scooped him into her arms, his tiny body trembling against her chest. Kyle extended his hand, guiding them toward the helicopter. "Almost there," he yelled, voice strained. Amelia adjusted her grip, mud and water dripping from her hair, but she didn't let go. The helicopter lowered its harness. Amelia carefully attached the child, ensuring he was secure before signaling the pilot. "Next," she shouted, pointing to the last passengers. The rescue team moved swiftly, hauling the remaining passengers to safety. Amelia felt the helicopter's downdraft buffet her, whipping mud and water across the bank. Sparks from the plane's wing ignited another small fireball, but everyone moved past it, adrenaline overriding fear. Finally, the last adult passenger was lifted off the bank. Amelia glanced back at the plane, now half submerged in mud and water, flames curling higher into the sky. The roar of the fire was deafening. For a brief moment, she allowed herself to exhale. They had made it, 200 lives, safe, against impossible odds. But Amelia knew better than to relax. Disaster had a way of lingering. She scanned the riverbank once more and noticed something alarming. The helicopter's cable was starting to sway dangerously. Strong gusts from the rotor blades, combined with the unstable terrain, were putting stress on the harness. Any sudden movement could throw the passengers into the river below. "Hold steady," Amelia shouted, running alongside the cable. Kyle mirrored her movements, keeping passengers balanced. The helicopter pilot hovered, muscles tense, eyes scanning the bank in flames. The wind roared, whipping mud and debris across the river. Amelia felt the precariousness of the situation in her bones. One wrong step, one gust of wind, and everything could unravel. A sudden snap echoed. A rope securing the cable had frayed under tension. Amelia's stomach dropped. She ran faster, grabbing the nearest passengers and helping them maintain their balance. Kyle pulled another adult away from the edge just as a wave of mud surged. Sparks from the plane shot into the air, and flames licked at the edge of the harness path. Amelia's heart pounded. "Almost there, don't stop, keep moving." Her voice was firm, unwavering, a lifeline amid chaos. Each step was calculated, deliberate, as she guided passengers to the safer side of the riverbank. Mud sucked at her boots, flames crackled nearby, and the wind threatened to push them off balance. Finally, all passengers were safe on solid ground. Amelia and Kyle exchanged a brief glance, exhausted but relieved. The helicopter had lifted the last of the passengers to safety. The riverbank was empty, the plane a smoking, mangled ruin in the distance. Amelia's legs trembled as she sank to the ground, her chest heaving. She had saved them, every single one. The reality of what she had done began to sink in, but there was no time for reflection. Rescue crews were still working, and the fire threatened to spread. Kyle sat beside her, mud streaking his face, eyes wide with awe. I can't believe we made it," he whispered. Amelia shook her head, exhausted but resolute. "We did, but the danger isn't over. That plane's still a threat. Any spark could make it explode further, and the fire could spread to the forest." Emergency crews arrived, taking over, establishing a perimeter and dousing the remaining flames with water from portable pumps. Amelia and Kyle moved aside, letting them handle the aftermath, but their eyes never left the plane. For a moment, Amelia allowed herself to breathe. The chaos, the fear, the impossible landing, they had survived it all. 200 lives had been preserved because of her decisions, skill, and courage. But then, as she looked back at the wreckage, she noticed something alarming. A small section of the fuselage shifted ominously, sparks flying. The plane was unstable, a secondary explosion imminent. If it went off now, it could destroy the riverbank, injuring the very people they had just saved. Amelia's pulse quickened. She couldn't let her guard down, not yet. Rescue crews were nearby, but if the fire reached that section of the plane, there would be no stopping it. She had to act again, despite exhaustion, despite fear. She stood, mud dripping from her uniform, and took a deep breath. "Kyle," she said, voice firm, "we're going back. We need to make sure that plane doesn't kill anyone else." Kyle's eyes widened, but he nodded. "I'm with you." The fire roared behind them, smoke stinging their eyes, mud underfoot threatening to pull them down. But Amelia and Kyle didn't hesitate. They ran toward the plane once more, determined to control the final threat, to prevent disaster from claiming any more lives. The cinematic battle wasn't over. The dual-engine failure had been only the beginning. And now, the final confrontation with the wreckage awaited, testing their courage, skill, and resilience one last time. Amelia's boots sank deep into the mud as she and Kyle approached the smoldering wreckage. The river's gentle current had been deceptive. It had saved them from disaster but now made footing treacherous. Sparks flew from twisted metal, and acrid smoke stung their eyes, filling their lungs with a choking haze. Every step was a calculated risk. One wrong move, and the unstable fuselage could collapse or explode. "Stay low," Amelia hissed, voice steady but tense. "We need to assess the risk before moving closer." Kyle nodded, his face pale but resolute. "How bad is it?" he asked, eyes darting from fire to riverbank. Amelia scanned the plane carefully. A section of the fuselage, already buckled from the crash, had shifted again, tilting dangerously toward a pool of spilled fuel. Sparks from exposed wiring danced over the metal, each one a potential ignition point. If it caught, the fire would explode outward, possibly sending shrapnel toward the riverbank where rescuers and passengers still waited. "Too close for comfort," Amelia muttered. She could feel the heat of the flames on her face, the smell of burning fuel thick in the air. This wasn't just about the passengers anymore, it was about everyone nearby. She had to act and fast. Amelia motioned to Kyle. "We need to stabilize that section. Use those support beams over there. Help me secure it before it slides further." Kyle glanced at her, doubt flickering in his eyes. "We're not trained for—" "Don't think," Amelia interrupted sharply. "Act. Lives are on the line, every second counts." They ran to a pile of emergency support equipment left behind by the arriving crews. Amelia grabbed heavy-duty beams and straps, mud caking her hands. Kyle mirrored her movements, struggling to keep up but determined not to falter. They wedged the beams under the shifting fuselage, bracing it against the mud and rocks, sweat dripping into their eyes. The fire hissed and roared behind them, but Amelia's focus was absolute. "Almost there," she muttered, muscles straining under the weight. The fuselage shifted again and sparks flew dangerously close to a puddle of fuel. Kyle lost his footing, mud sending him sprawling. Amelia lunged, grabbing his arm and pulling him upright just in time. "Thanks," he gasped, breathing hard. "No time," Amelia said. "Keep going." The plane groaned ominously under their adjustments, metal twisting and creaking. Amelia could feel the immense pressure, the weight of the aircraft threatening to crush them with a single miscalculation. Yet she persisted, driven by adrenaline, fear, and the stubborn refusal to lose anyone else. Behind them, the helicopter circled, keeping a vigilant eye on the scene. Rescue crews shouted instructions over the wind and rotors, moving as fast as they could to manage the chaos. Amelia ignored the noise, her world reduced to the plane, Kyle, and the lives hanging in the balance. "Secure the right side," she shouted. Sparks from the fuselage jumped closer to the fuel puddle. Amelia adjusted the beam, wedging it tighter under the plane. Kyle tightened straps around the shifting metal. The plane shuddered under their combined effort, but for now it held. Amelia allowed herself a fraction of a breath, but there was no time to relax. The fire was creeping along the fuselage toward the tail, threatening to ignite the remaining fuel. "Back to the riverbank," she yelled. "We need to evacuate any remaining personnel still too close." Together, they guided the last of the rescue team and passengers to a safer zone. Mud and water threatened to sweep them back into danger, but Amelia stayed focused, her instincts honed to razor-sharp precision. Every movement had to be exact. One slip could spell disaster. Once the area was clear, Amelia and Kyle returned to the plane for a final inspection. Sparks still flew from damaged wiring, and the flames licked hungrily at the edges. Amelia spotted one particularly dangerous section, a ruptured fuel line near the engine casing, smoke curling from it. "Kyle," she said, voice steady despite exhaustion, "we need to contain that fuel line before it ignites." Kyle's eyes widened. "With what we don't have?" Amelia cut him off. "Improvisation, that's all we have right now." She grabbed a fire extinguisher from a nearby crew member and sprayed the base of the fuel puddle. Smoke hissed and thickened, mingling with the burning scent of melted metal. Kyle followed, spraying along the edges to keep the fire from spreading. Sparks continued to fly dangerously, but their combined effort held the flames at bay, just enough to prevent catastrophe. Minutes felt like hours. The plane groaned, a low, ominous sound, but Amelia's braces and straps kept it from sliding further into the river. She wiped mud and sweat from her eyes, her heart racing. The danger wasn't gone, but it was contained. For now. Kyle let out a shaky laugh. I can't believe we're still standing. Amelia didn't respond, her focus still on the plane. She was already calculating what could happen if the fuel line burst or if a gust of wind fanned the flames. Every instinct screamed at her to stay vigilant. Then a new sound cut through the chaos, a distant rumble growing louder. Amelia's stomach dropped. She looked upstream. A sudden surge of water, debris breaking free from the riverbanks, headed straight toward the plane. Not now, she shouted. Adrenaline surged anew. We need to hold the line. She and Kyle braced themselves, straining against the plane and the shifting mud, using the beams as leverage to stabilize the fuselage. Sparks flew, water splashed over their boots, and the roar of the approaching current echoed through the valley. Amelia's lungs burned, her muscles screamed, but she refused to let go. The surge hit the plane, shaking it violently. The fuselage threatened to tip, but Amelia's braces and quick adjustments held. Kyle's hands shook, but he matched her efforts, anchoring the straps and beams. The plane groaned and rattled under the force, but it didn't fall. Amelia's mind raced. The surge would pass soon, and they would need to maintain their hold until backup crews could secure the plane fully. Every second was a battle between human determination and the raw, unstoppable forces of nature. Finally, the river surge passed, the immediate threat receding. Amelia and Kyle sank to their knees, exhausted, mud-caked and shaken. Sparks still flew from the plane, but the fuel line was contained and the fuselage remained stable. Rescue crews finally approached, securing the area with additional beams and safety equipment. Amelia allowed herself a brief glance at the horizon, watching as emergency responders began managing the fire and unstable wreckage. The threat had been neutralized, for now, but the memory of the plane, teetering on the edge of disaster, would stay with her forever. Kyle looked at Amelia, awe and exhaustion etched across his face. You really saved them all," he whispered. Amelia shook her head, a mix of relief and lingering adrenaline flooding her system. "We saved them, together." She finally allowed herself a long, deep breath, feeling the weight of what had happened. 200 lives had been preserved against impossible odds, but the danger had been relentless, unyielding. It was a miracle they had survived, and yet Amelia knew the story wasn't finished. In the distance, the remnants of the plane smoldered, a stark reminder of what could have been. Amelia stared at it, chest heaving, mind still racing with calculations, memories, and the adrenaline-fueled intensity of the past hours. She had faced the unthinkable and survived. But even as she stood there, mud and soot covering her, a flicker in her peripheral vision caught her attention. A final, unseen hazard, threatening to undo everything they had fought so hard to survive. The valley, the river, and the plane waited silently, promising one last test of courage and skill. Amelia's boots sank into the mud as she stood surveying the smoldering wreckage. The plane, now partially stabilized by the emergency crews, still radiated heat and danger. Sparks flickered from the twisted metal, and smoke coiled into the sky, thick and choking. She had thought the worst was over, but the flicker she had seen in the corner of her eye hinted at something she couldn't ignore. "Kyle," she called, voice sharp and steady, forcing herself to stay in command, "check the east side of the fuselage. Something's not right." Kyle nodded, grim-faced, and moved cautiously through the mud. Amelia followed the line of the wreckage, scanning for potential hazards. Her heart pounded, not from exhaustion but from anticipation. This wasn't over. Her instincts screamed that the plane could still shift, collapse, or ignite, and that danger could strike in an instant. As they reached the east wing, Amelia saw it, a large, jagged piece of fuselage, partially burned and barely held in place by a single brace. Sparks danced along a fuel line beneath it, the angle of the wreck suggesting it could tip at any moment. A sudden gust of wind could trigger a final catastrophe. She swallowed hard. "That section is unstable," she muttered, glancing at Kyle. "If it goes, it could collapse the east side completely, possibly injuring anyone too close." Kyle's face went pale. "Can we stabilize it?" Amelia didn't hesitate. "We have to try. Every second counts." They moved quickly, working together to place additional support beams and tighten straps. The mud clung to their boots, pulling them down as they shifted heavy metal into position. Sparks flew dangerously close to the damaged fuel line, and Amelia had to duck repeatedly to avoid injury. Her gloves were slick with mud and sweat, and every movement required precision. A single misstep could tip the fuselage. Minutes felt like hours. Amelia's arms burned, muscles trembling with exertion, but she pushed forward. Kyle followed her lead, his fear tempered by trust and determination. The unstable section groaned under their adjustments, metal twisting as though protesting their interference. Amelia gritted her teeth and forced herself to focus. This was no longer about surviving the crash. It was about preventing a secondary disaster. Suddenly, a loud crack echoed through the valley. Amelia froze. The jagged fuselage shifted slightly. Sparks shot up from the fuel line, landing dangerously close to dry debris. Her pulse skyrocketed. "Kyle, hold the brace. Don't let it slide," she shouted. Kyle planted his feet in the mud, straining to keep the beam steady. Amelia pushed with every ounce of strength she had, wedging the fuselage into a more stable position. The metal groaned and shivered, but it held, for now. From the riverbank, the helicopter pilot called out, "Crew, the fire's spreading faster than expected. We need clearance for full evacuation." Amelia's mind raced. Two options: evacuate now and risk leaving the unstable fuselage to ignite, or stay and secure it, risking exposure to the spreading fire. She clenched her jaw, weighing the risk. Every second mattered. Every decision carried consequences. "We hold," she shouted. "We can stabilize it. Everyone else is safe. We're not leaving until this section is secure." Kyle nodded, eyes wide, sweat and mud streaking his face. "All right, let's do it." They worked with precision, improvising with ropes, straps, and beams. Sparks flew dangerously, but Amelia maintained focus, calculating angles, pressure points, and the weight distribution of the fuselage. She shifted a metal brace slightly, wedged another under the edge, and finally secured it with straps. The unstable section shuddered violently once, but held. Amelia allowed herself a brief glance upward, seeing the relief on Kyle's face. They had bought a little more time, but the fire continued to spread. Flames licked closer to the fuel line, and the heat became nearly unbearable. "Now we need to retreat," Amelia said firmly. "Get everyone farther up the bank." They moved quickly, guiding the last crew members and rescue personnel to safety. The helicopter hovered nearby, ready to lift any stragglers. Sparks from the plane crackled with menace, smoke stinging their eyes. Amelia felt the weight of every life around her. 200 passengers, multiple rescue crews, all had survived the impossible crash, but one slip could undo everything. Suddenly, a loud boom echoed across the valley. Amelia's heart lurched. A section of the fuselage farther back had shifted, igniting a secondary blaze. Flames roared, leaping higher, but the passengers and crew were safely distant. Amelia's instincts kicked in. "Kyle, stay with me. We need to keep that fire from spreading to the main fuselage." They grabbed extinguishers from nearby crew members and ran toward the blaze. Heat licked their faces, mud and debris coating every inch of their uniforms. Amelia directed the water spray with precision, dousing flames that threatened to reach the fuel line. Sparks hissed as metal warped in the heat, but for now, the fire was contained. The helicopter pilot hovered closer, signaling that the evacuation could begin. Amelia looked at Kyle. "We've held it. Now it's time to get ourselves out of here." Together, they guided the final rescue crew members onto the helicopter harnesses. Each movement required care, precision, and strength, but they succeeded. One by one, they lifted off the riverbank, leaving the burning fuselage behind. Amelia's heart pounded in her chest as she finally ascended above the chaos. Below, the plane burned, smoke and sparks swirling into the sky. The river reflected the orange inferno like molten glass. Amelia exhaled, relief washing over her, but exhaustion hit hard. Her body trembled, muscles screaming from the effort, but her mind was alive with the intensity of what they had just survived. Kyle leaned beside her in the helicopter, mud and soot streaking his face. "Amelia, you saved everyone," he whispered, voice barely audible over the rotor blades. She shook her head, eyes on the river below. "We saved them together. Every single life matters." The helicopter rose higher, taking them away from the burning wreckage. Amelia watched the valley shrink beneath them, the fire crackling, the river reflecting the chaos. The wind whipped her hair, and for the first time she allowed herself to breathe fully. 200 lives, saved, against impossible odds, against dual-engine failure, a river landing, mud, debris, fire, and the relentless forces of nature. Amelia had faced the unthinkable and emerged victorious. But as the valley disappeared behind the mountain ridges, Amelia couldn't shake the memory of the moments when disaster could have struck. The fear, the adrenaline, the desperate decisions, all of it would stay with her forever. For now, though, there was silence. The chaos behind them was fading. The passengers were safe. The rescue crews were managing the fire. Amelia's body ached, her hands were blistered, and her mind raced, but she had survived, and so had everyone else. She allowed herself a fleeting smile. They had done the impossible. And even as the helicopter carried them toward safety, Amelia knew that stories of courage, resilience, and calm under pressure would carry this day forward for years to come. The cinematic ordeal had reached its climax, but the memory of every second, every choice, every life saved would echo forever. Amelia sat in the helicopter, her body aching, mud-caked and soaked through, the roar of the rotors vibrating through her chest. Below, the river reflected the orange glow of the burning plane, now partially engulfed in flames and twisted metal. 200 lives had survived because of her skill, her courage, and her unyielding focus. For a brief moment she allowed herself to feel it, relief, satisfaction, exhaustion. Kyle sat beside her, equally dirty and equally drained, yet the awe in his eyes was unmistakable. "We did it. All of them made it," he said, voice trembling, still grappling with the magnitude of the day. Amelia shook her head, exhaling slowly, letting the tension seep from her body. "We did it together. Everyone played their part. We just made sure they all got home." Her voice was quiet, almost humble, but her eyes burned with the intensity of someone who had stared death in the face and held steady. The helicopter banked toward the nearest emergency medical base. Paramedics were already preparing stretchers, blankets, and first aid supplies for the passengers. Each individual was quickly assessed, and Amelia watched as relief and exhaustion mixed in equal measure across the faces of the rescued. Some were crying, others hugging loved ones, and a few sat silently, still processing the terror they had endured. One of the first passengers off the helicopter was a young mother clutching her baby tightly. She looked at Amelia, eyes wide and shimmering with tears, and whispered a simple, choked out, "Thank you." Amelia only nodded, too drained for words, but that one moment carried more weight than any accolade ever could. Emergency crews moved efficiently, attending to minor injuries, hypothermia, and shock. Amelia and Kyle helped guide the passengers to the designated medical tents, staying close to ensure no one was left behind. The helicopter's blades kicked up dust, mud, and debris, a tangible reminder of how close they had come to catastrophe. Once the passengers were safe, Amelia allowed herself a moment to lean against the side of the helicopter. Mud streaked her uniform, her hair clung to her face, and her arms trembled with the strain of hours of exertion. She looked back at the river valley. The wreckage still smoked and crackled, but the danger had been contained. 200 lives, every single one, had been saved. Against all odds. Kyle joined her, eyes following hers. "You were incredible," he said softly, voice filled with admiration. "I don't think I've ever seen anyone stay so calm in a situation like that." Amelia shook her head. "I wasn't calm, not really. I was terrified, but I focused on the people, on what needed to be done. Fear can't control you in a moment like that. You can't let it. You just do." Kyle nodded, absorbing every word. "You're a hero," he said simply. Amelia gave a faint smile, humility and exhaustion mingling. "Heroes are everyone who did their part. The rescue crews, the passengers who stayed calm, even you. It's what you do in the face of fear that counts, not what titles people give you later." The sound of sirens drew her attention. Emergency vehicles had arrived at the nearby base camp, bringing more firefighters, medics, and support staff. The chaos of the day was slowly being managed, but the memory of the river landing, the fire, and the precarious fuselage would linger in every mind that had witnessed it. As night fell, the valley transformed. The smoke from the plane rose into the dark sky, glowing faintly against the last remnants of daylight. Amelia sat silently, exhausted but alert, watching the scene below. Reporters would come, the story would spread, and the world would know of the miraculous survival. But she knew that the real story was in the details, the lives saved, and the choices made in those critical moments. Later, in a small, makeshift tent set up for the crew, Amelia finally allowed herself to sit. Kyle joined her, both of them dripping with mud and grime, and they shared a quiet laugh, a release of tension, disbelief, and the lingering adrenaline that refused to leave. One of the paramedics approached. "Amelia, Kyle, there's a press crew arriving to interview you both. They want to know how two pilots managed to save 200 lives in a crash landing." Amelia closed her eyes briefly, exhausted beyond belief. "Let them come. But remember," she said, voice soft but firm, "it's not about glory. It's about staying calm, making the right choices, and trusting the people around you. That's what saves lives." Hours later, news of the miraculous landing had spread across national networks. Images of the burning plane, the river landing, and the exhausted yet triumphant Amelia and Kyle flooded social media. Viewers were captivated, many moved to tears, some calling it a miracle. Experts analyzed the landing, praising Amelia's composure, quick thinking, and technical skill. Pilots, engineers, and even casual viewers marveled at her precision, her ability to transform a near-death scenario into survival for every passenger on board. Amelia, however, kept her attention on the faces of the passengers she had just helped save. Elderly couples clasping hands, young children clutching their parents, college students comforting one another. They were the reason she had acted with every ounce of her being. Fame or accolades mattered little compared to the knowledge that every life had been preserved. In the following days, Amelia and Kyle were formally recognized for their heroism. Certificates, awards, and commendations came, but more importantly, the airline, the passengers, and the emergency services acknowledged the sheer skill and courage it had taken to land a dual-engine failed plane into a river, save lives amidst fire and mud, and confront danger relentlessly until every single person was safe. During a press conference, Amelia spoke quietly but clearly. "I wasn't alone. This was a team effort. 200 lives were saved because of the passengers, the rescue crews, Kyle, and every single person who acted without hesitation. I hope this reminds everyone that courage isn't the absence of fear, it's acting despite it." The applause was thunderous. Cameras flashed. Headlines proclaimed her heroism. But Amelia's mind remained on that river, the twisted fuselage, the trembling hands of passengers, and the split-second decisions that had meant the difference between life and death. Even as recognition poured in, Amelia knew she would never forget the river, the fire, the chaos. But she also knew something else. She had faced the impossible and emerged not just surviving, but saving lives, turning disaster into triumph. That night, as Amelia sat quietly in her apartment, mud-streaked uniform now replaced with clean clothes, she thought back on every moment. The dual-engine failure, the river landing, the fire, the unstable fuselage, the helicopter evacuation. It all played in her mind like a vivid, cinematic montage. Her phone buzzed. A message from Kyle: "We did it. Everyone is safe. You were amazing." Amelia smiled faintly, exhaustion and pride mingling. She replied simply, "We did it together." And as she set her phone down, staring out the window at the quiet night, she felt a deep, unshakable peace. 200 lives had been saved. Fear had been confronted. Chaos had been overcome. And amidst it all, Amelia had discovered the depth of courage she never knew she possessed. The world would remember the river landing, the impossible survival, the heroism. But for Amelia, the true story was in every small choice, every moment of focus, and every life she had fought to protect. The cinematic ordeal had ended, but the memory of courage, resilience, and hope would echo forever. And somewhere in the quiet aftermath, Amelia allowed herself to smile. She had flown not just for passengers, but for every life that depended on her. And she had succeeded.